When my mother-in-law took my passport and set it on fire, the flames consumed it quickly until there was nothing left but ash. Now I couldn't go on my vacation to St. Bert's Island. What? I gasped in shock. You're kidding, right? But they weren't. My mother-in-law and my husband both stood there, grinning at me with a twisted sense of satisfaction. They had planned this all along, and now I was stuck. The weight of their betrayal hit me like a wave. I stared at them, horrified, as they chuckled at my misery. Well, I muttered, trying to keep my cool. I had suspected something might go wrong. But this was beyond my worst fears. They were celebrating my defeat like it was some kind of victory. Alone, 27 years old, I thought to myself, reminding myself of who I was. I had always been independent and strong. I studied linguistics in university and had spent the last few years expanding my knowledge of languages and cultures, traveling the world, and sharing my experiences. I worked with an international organization that sent me abroad for months at a time, doing various activities and contributing to global projects. I'd never imagined myself getting married, especially with a career that took me away so often. But when I was 24, I met Riker. He was kind and patient, or so I thought at the time. Despite my constant travels, we made it work through phone calls and emails. After 2 years, we tied the knot when I was 26. But even then, I still spent half the year abroad, and we were often apart. Still, I had been grateful that he accepted my lifestyle. Today, I was coming back home after 5 long months away. I was exhausted from the flight, but my heart was light as I looked forward to seeing Riker. I couldn't wait to be with him again. As soon as I got home, though, I noticed the apartment was a mess. It was always messy when I came back, but I usually let it go. Today, I didn't care. I just wanted to be with him again. I was cooking dinner when I heard the front door open. Riker walked into the living room, and I rushed to greet him. Riker, welcome home. It's so good to see you. Oh, hey, Aloan, he responded casually, barely looking at me. You're home. His lackluster response threw me off. Wait, that's it? We haven't seen each other in 5 months, and that's all you can say? He shrugged. We've been living like this for a while. I'm used to it.
What?
I blinked, unable to believe what I was hearing. You could at least say you missed me. I'm tired, he muttered, brushing me off. Is dinner ready? Yeah, it's ready, I replied quietly, feeling a knot forming in my stomach. Something felt off. We sat down to eat together, but I couldn't shake the tension. It should have been a happy moment, our first meal together in months, but Riker kept glancing at his phone the entire time, barely talking to me. Why do you keep checking your phone? I asked, my voice strained. What's wrong with that? He replied, annoyed. Nothing's wrong, but I'm finally home. You've barely said a word to me, and you've been glued to your phone since you walked in. We've been communicating through texts and emails for months. What else is there to talk about? His voice was cold, dismissive. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I had been so excited to see him, and this was how he was acting? My frustration was building, and I couldn't hold it back any longer. That's not the point, Riker. It's been 5 months. We haven't seen each other in person for that long, and now you're acting like this? He slammed his phone down on the table and stood up, glaring at me. You've been on a plane for hours. I've been working nonstop, and I'm tired.
You don't get to talk to me like that.
I stood up too, angry now. I got off a plane right after work. Don't act like I've had it easy. I didn't ask you to come home, he shot back, his voice filled with irritation. If you're going to be this annoying, maybe you shouldn't come back at all. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. Well, what did you just say? I stammered, feeling tears well up in my eyes. I'm tired, Aloan. You're just making things harder. With that, he stormed out of the room, leaving his dinner untouched on the table. I stood there in shock, unable to move. What had just happened? Why was he treating me this way? I had missed him so much, and all I wanted was to be close to him again. But instead, I was met with coldness and anger. Tears started rolling down my cheeks, dropping onto the table as I realized how miserable this reunion had become. The next morning, things hadn't improved. When I greeted Riker, he barely acknowledged me, giving me a cold stare instead. "I'm jealous of you," he said suddenly, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You get to sit around and do nothing while I'm working my butt off every day." "That's not true," I replied, trying to stay calm. "I have work to do too, planning, organizing, preparing for the next project." "It's not as easy as you think," he snorted. "Yeah, but you get to do it from home half the year. I'd kill for a job like that." "You don't have to say it like that," I said, feeling defensive. "Whatever, princess," he muttered. "I'm off to work." And with that, he walked out the door, leaving me standing there, speechless. We had argued before, sure, but never like this. His sarcasm and bitterness were new to me, and it hurt more than I could put into words. I started to wonder if my husband's words were holding me back, keeping me from seeing the bigger picture. I was lost in thought, wondering what I could do to help fix the situation. As I tried to focus on work-related materials, I decided to distract myself by cleaning the house. Maybe doing something productive would help clear my head. As I vacuumed the floor and changed the bedsheets, my phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. I glanced at the screen and saw my mother-in-law's name flash across it. Instantly, a bad feeling washed over me. Reluctantly, I answered the call. "Hello, this is Eloan," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. "Long time no see, Eloan," came her voice, dripping with false sweetness. "I heard you're back. You came home yesterday, didn't you?" "Yes, that's right," I replied, sensing where this conversation might be headed. "And I also heard you said something upsetting to Riker. He seemed pretty angry about it." "I'm sorry, but it's really nothing for you to worry about," I responded, trying to brush off her meddling. "Well, listen," she continued, ignoring my attempt to close the subject. "Since you're home now, I was thinking we should all go on a family trip together." "What?" I couldn't help but let out a surprised sound. "A trip?" Without waiting for my response, she pushed ahead. "Actually, I've been discussing it with my husband, and we were thinking of going to St. Bert's Island." Then Riker mentioned how much he wanted to join us. My heart sank. Riker had said that? "Wait, what? Riker wants to go?" I stammered. "That's right, Eloan. And since you're used to traveling abroad so often, I was hoping you could help with the hotel reservations and other arrangements." "Me?" I was taken aback. Why was she asking me to do this? Or, are you ignoring what your mother-in-law is asking you to do? Her voice turned cold, the tone suddenly shifting to one of authority. I knew deep down she didn't really want me on the trip. She was just using me for my experience and convenience. Ever since we first met at my wedding reception, my mother-in-law had been openly hostile toward me. It had been 3 years since Riker and I got married, but nothing had changed. She had always made snide comments about my lifestyle, often sending me cruel messages while I was away for work. "How can you call yourself a wife when you're away from home for months at a time?" she'd written in one of her many nasty texts. "If you can't take care of the house, I'd rather Riker marry someone else. It was a mistake to let him marry a woman like you." So, when I got her call about this family trip, I wasn't entirely surprised. But I hadn't expected to be manipulated into organizing everything. It was clear she saw me as a tool, someone who could make the trip smoother for her. As angry as I felt, I couldn't bring myself to say no. I hated that I was giving in, but I didn't know how to push back. Later that day, Riker came home from work in a much better mood than he'd been in that morning. He tossed his briefcase onto the sofa and smiled widely at me. "Mom called you, didn't she?" he said, as if he were excited about something. "We're going on a trip to St. Bert's Island." "Great, right?" "Yeah, I heard about it," I said cautiously. "But, Riker, why don't you just go with your mom and dad like you originally planned?" The moment those words left my mouth, his expression darkened. His eyes narrowed, and he clicked his tongue in frustration. "You need to learn how to read the situation alone," he said, his voice sharp. "The only time you're of any use to us is when we travel." I felt a pang in my chest. "You don't have to talk to me like that," I said quietly. "But it's the truth, isn't it?" he snapped. "Anyway, you'll take care of booking the flights and the hotels. And remember, everything should be in my name." I stared at him in disbelief. "Riker, you're paying for the whole trip?" "Of course not. We're splitting it 50-50, he replied, as if it were the most reasonable thing in the world. It's a small price to show some respect to my parents. What? I said, struggling to keep my voice calm. If you've got time to argue, you've got time to make the reservations. Get to it, he added before grabbing a beer from the fridge and gulping it down. I stood there, feeling both angry and trapped. I wanted to fight back, to tell him how wrong this was. But deep down, I was scared of the consequences if I rebelled. Shame washed over me, and reluctantly, I did as I was told. I made all the arrangements for the flights and accommodations for the trip to St. Bert's Island, just as Riker had ordered. The day of the trip was approaching, and I was supposed to pick up Riker and his parents at their house before heading to the airport. But a few nights before the trip, something fell off. I couldn't sleep, so I got up in the middle of the night. When I glanced at Riker's side of the bed, I noticed he wasn't there. I wandered into the living room and heard his voice.
He was on the phone with someone.
Oh, don't worry, everything's going as planned, he said quietly. Mom, just handle the passport thing, okay? And seriously, I'm really looking forward to this. I'll introduce her to you when I get back. I froze. Passport thing? I thought, confused. And who was he planning to introduce? My mind raced, trying to make sense of his words. He had mentioned Mom, so I was sure he was talking to my mother-in-law. But what was this about a passport? And introducing someone? There was something going on between Riker and his mother that I couldn't quite grasp. Whatever it was, it didn't feel right. And now I had a sinking feeling that the trip was part of something bigger, something they had planned together. What would they do to me if I went to their house? I didn't know all the details, but by this point, it was clear I couldn't trust anything happening around me. I had to be cautious, at least until we left for St. Bart's. The day of the trip finally came, and I got into the car with my carry-on case and the handbag my husband had asked me to pack. I filled it with his personal belongings as well. We headed to my in-laws' house together, and even though I wasn't sure what they had in store for me, I was prepared to face whatever came. When we arrived at my in-laws' house, I kept telling myself to make the best of the situation, no matter how uneasy I felt. We walked in together, and my mother-in-law greeted us, her voice dripping with fake warmth. Oh, hi, Eloan, you're here. It's been a while. Good to see you, she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. We're almost ready. I just need to grab a few things for the trip, so you'll have to wait a bit. Take your time, I responded, trying to keep things cordial. But then, in a sudden shift of tone, she added, Oh, Eloan, could you get the carry-on from the other room? It's heavy, so maybe Riker can help you with it. I nodded, but I didn't miss the quick glance exchanged between my husband and his mother. There was something odd about it. They were up to something, I could feel it. Just to be safe, I had my passport in my pocket. My gut was telling me not to trust anyone. At Riker's insistence, I carried the heavy case back into the living room. But when I got there, my mother-in-law was standing with a smug grin, and she had something in her hand. It was a passport. She waved it in front of me, her smile growing wider. Well, looks like you won't be going on any trip to St. Bart's after all, she said, her voice filled with a twisted glee. What? I asked, confused and alarmed. What do you mean? She flicked open the lighter she was holding and smirked. I'm going to burn this passport right now. You were only useful for booking the trip arrangements. I never intended for you to come along. My heart raced as I realized what she was about to do. What are you doing? You can't be serious. I shouted, but she ignored me completely. You're just a stranger to us, she said coldly. So, you'll be staying here while we go on the trip. Too bad. With that, she walked to the kitchen, and without any hesitation, she set the passport on fire. The flames quickly devoured the edges of the booklet, and soon enough, it was nothing but ashes in the sink. She turned back to me, a satisfied grin plastered on her face. We did it, she exclaimed, almost giddy. Riker, standing beside her, cheered as well, pumping his fist in the air. Yeah, Mom, we pulled it off, he said, looking far too pleased with himself. Now, it'll just be the three of us on this trip, and when we get back, I can introduce you to my new girlfriend. My stomach dropped at his words. What did you just say? I whispered, barely able to believe my ears. Riker looked at me, that smug expression still on his face. Oh, yeah, I'm seeing someone else. I've already made plans to move in with her when we return. I'm not divorcing you because I care about my reputation, but I'll be with her. You'll stay behind. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. He wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. He pulled out his phone and showed me pictures of him with another woman. His face was beaming with pride, as if betraying me was something to be proud of. I don't need you anymore alone, he said with a sneer. You're nothing to us. My mother-in-law laughed heartily, clearly enjoying every second of my misery. The evil in their eyes was undeniable. At that moment, I realized just how toxic and cruel these people were. They never saw me as family. They only saw me as a tool to be used and discarded. But then I smiled. I had one more card to play. By the way, I said calmly, whose passport do you think that was? Both Riker and his mother looked at me, puzzled. What are you talking about? Of course, it was your passport, she snapped. Really? I asked, enjoying the growing confusion on their faces. Are you sure it was mine? You took it from my handbag, right? My mother-in-law's confidence wavered, and I could see the panic beginning to creep in. Yes, of course, it was yours, she said, but her voice was less certain now. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my real passport, waving it in front of them with a smile. Actually, my passport's right here. Their eyes widened in shock. My mother-in-law's face turned pale as she gasped. No, that can't be, she stammered. Oh, but it is, I replied sweetly. The passport you burned? That was Riker's. The color drained from her face as she finally realized what she had done. She had destroyed her own son's passport, thinking it was mine. My husband, who had been basking in his moment of triumph, suddenly turned on her.
Mom.
What did you do? He yelled, furious. I told you to be careful. I only found one passport in the bag, she cried, her voice shaking. How was I supposed to know it was his? You didn't check? Riker shouted, his anger boiling over. This is all your fault. The two of them started to argue, pointing fingers and blaming each other. I stood there, watching the chaos unfold, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction. Their plan had completely backfired. They were too caught up in their own schemes to see it coming. I was beyond disgusted as I stood there, watching my husband and mother-in-law argue. The sight of them turned my stomach. But then my husband had the audacity to yell at me. Hey, Aloan, do something, he barked, as if I were still supposed to fix the mess they had created. I wasn't about to let him get away with it. I felt all the anger I had been holding back rise to the surface. Seriously? You think you can tell me what to do after everything you've done? I shot back, my voice shaking with fury. You cheated on me, lied to me, and now you expect me to clean up after you? You and your mother are both disgusting, selfish people. Watch your mouth, Aloan, he shouted, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. You don't know who you're talking to. Oh, I know exactly who I'm talking to, I snapped, refusing to back down. You're a cheating, lying coward. And your mother? She's no better. You think you're going to get away with all of this? Think again. You'll pay for the affair, and you'll both answer for every cruel word your mother ever said to me. Just then, my father-in-law came downstairs, clearly confused by the commotion. What's going on down here? He asked, looking between us. I didn't waste a second. I told him everything. How they had burned Riker's passport, how they had planned to take me on the trip just to humiliate me, and about the affair. As I spoke, his face turned red with anger. I can't believe this, he muttered, shaking his head. He turned to my mother-in-law, his voice filled with disgust. We're not going on this trip. It's over. The trip was officially canceled. My mother-in-law tried to protest, but it was too late. My father-in-law was livid, and nothing she said would change his mind. In the aftermath, things spiraled even further. He filed for divorce, cutting ties with her once and for all. As for Riker, he was disowned by his father, never allowed to come home again. I didn't stop there. I consulted a lawyer, and within weeks, I filed for divorce from Riker. I wasn't going to let him walk away without consequences. I demanded alimony from both him and his mother, given the emotional abuse and betrayal I had endured. Neither of them had the money to pay me up front, so they had to borrow heavily just to settle the debt. To make matters worse for Riker, he was also on the hook for the costs of canceling the entire St. Bart's trip. He and his mother were the kind of people who never saved money, so it didn't take long for them to feel the financial strain. They had to scrape together whatever they could, and now they barely made ends meet. I heard through the grapevine that the woman Riker had an affair with eventually dumped him too, leaving him alone with nothing but his mother's bitter company. As for me, I walked away from that nightmare with my head held high. I used the alimony to move out and rent a beautiful condo, finally free from the toxic environment I had been trapped in for so long. It felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. All the hardships, the betrayal, and the emotional abuse, they were behind me now. I was free. With my new sense of freedom, I planned to do what I loved most, travel. I wanted to continue visiting different countries, immersing myself in their cultures, and sharing my experiences with the world. There was so much to explore, and for the first time in a long time, I felt genuinely excited about the future. Thank you for sticking with me through this journey. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for more content. See you in the next video.